All right, we're going to talk about section 7.3, part 3, cell membranes. The function of a cell membrane, there are two main functions. That is, number one, regulate what enters and leaves the cell, and also number two, protect and support the cell. Those are two important functions you want to make sure you get written down. Just as a working factory has walls and a roof to protect it from the environment outside, your cell has a membrane to protect it from the environment outside, and also serves to protect and keep its products safe and secure until they're ready to be shipped out. And the cell membrane does the same thing for the cell. It protects the internal contents of the cell, all those cell organelles we've just been learning about, and all the important products that a cell makes until it's ready to be shipped out. So cells are surrounded by a barrier known as the cell membrane. And also many cells, like plant cells, most prokaryotes, like bacteria, and plant cells produce a supporting layer around the cell membrane called the cell wall. So there's the cell membrane, and then surrounding that is the cell wall. That's for plant cells and most prokaryotes, the bacteria. The cell wall has a main function of providing support and protection for the cell, so an additional layer of support and protection beyond what the cell membrane can provide. Like we said, prokaryotes, the bacteria, plants, algae, most of the fungi have cell walls. Animal cells do not have cell walls, so your cells do not have cell walls. These cell walls lie outside the cell membrane, and they are porous enough to allow water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and a few other substances to pass through easily. So they're protective, but they also allow some things to pass through. All cells contain a cell membrane. That cell membrane regulates what can enter and leave the cell and protect and support the cell. So two jobs: regulate what enters and leaves and protect and support the cell. All cell membranes have the same basic structure. The membrane is a double-layered sheet called a lipid bilayer. So it's two layers of lipids, and it gives them a flexible structure and makes a very strong barrier between the cell and its surrounding. So the lipids are right here, and there's two parts to the lipid. There's a hydrophilic head. Hydrophilic meaning water-loving, hydrophobic meaning water-fearing. If you remember when we talked about lipids, that lipids had these long tails that could be straight-chained or branched or bent. They could be saturated or unsaturated. But those long tails are very oily. And so that means they interact strongly with water, and they don't like water. So the fatty acid, the tail part of the lipid in our cell membrane, is hydrophobic, which means water hating or water fearing. And that's this part of the cell membrane, the lipid. And the opposite end, or the head end, is hydrophilic or water loving, and that's this part right up here. So the cell membrane, this part is water loving, and this part is water loving, and then these parts here are the water fearing parts. So the water fearing parts are in the middle, and the water loving parts are in the outside. So the hydrophilic fatty acid heads cluster together, like I just said, and the tails are attracted to water, and hydrophobic tails are not attracted to water. That's a typo. They're not attracted to water, and that makes it this two-layered cell membrane. The head part of the lipid is exposed to water on both the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell. And the fatty acid tails form this kind of oily layer in between, and then water can't mix with that. So it makes a waterproof barrier where water is acceptable on the outside and inside of the cell, but there's a barrier in between the two. In addition to this lipid bilayer, or these two layers of lipids, most cell membranes will contain protein molecules embedded in the lipid bilayer, and we see them here and here and here. And they also contain carbohydrate molecules that are attached to many of these proteins, and we see those here and here. Those are carbohydrate molecules. These proteins that are embedded in the lipid bilayer have the ability to move around, the proteins can, and kind of float around among the lipids. And there are many other different kinds of molecules in the cell membrane. Scientists often describe the cell membrane as a fluid mosaic. A mosaic in art is a painting or a picture made up of a bunch of small little pieces of tile. So we have a bunch of small little pieces that make up this whole cell membrane, and it's fluid because things can float around. So fluid mosaic. So these proteins and carbohydrates that are embedded in the fluid mosaic of the cell membrane have some specific jobs. So some of the proteins' jobs is to form a channel and a pump that helps move material across the cell membrane. So either they make an open channel, like an open door, and things can go through, or they're actually a pump, and like you would pump water uphill, it pumps materials into or out of the cell. Many of the carbohydrate molecules act like chemical identification cards, and they allow cells to identify one another and what type of cell they are. The cell membrane is said to be what is called selectively permeable or semi-permeable. The best analogy that I have to help you understand what that's like, it's kind of like a screen door. So you open in the springtime, when it's really nice outside, you open the front door and you have a screen door, and the screen door lets air and breeze, and it can let water through, and it can let small bugs through, teeny tiny bugs, but the big stuff doesn't go through. The big bugs, the leaves, those kinds of things are too large to go across through the screen. So the same thing is true with our cell membrane. So many substances can cross our membrane, things like water and oxygen and carbon dioxide, but some things are too large, or they have too strong of a charge. So if things have a charge, like a positive ion or a negative ion, they cannot cross the lipid bilayer. So if a substance is able to cross the membrane, then we say the membrane is permeable to it, or it's impermeable for things that cannot. So most biological membranes, like a cell membrane, is what we call selectively permeable, meaning that some substances, like very small molecules like water and oxygen and carbon dioxide, can pass across them, but other molecules cannot. So large molecules like glucose or any of those biological molecules we talked about, anything that has a charge to it cannot pass across the cell membrane. So these selectively permeable membranes can also be called semi-permeable membranes. So a cell membrane, we want to remember that it has a fluid mosaic model. That's its structure, and it is semi or selectively permeable, meaning some things can go across it and some things cannot.